Well, thank you, Paige. Hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us today for our Advanced Concepts webinar. Let me tell you why I care about a presentation like this. This is the view out of my bedroom window of the 71-unit condo association where I was president. It was probably my second or third meeting as president, and we were in my living room sitting around my coffee table, and the manager reported that the living room window, the big picture window in one of the units, was leaking and needed to be replaced for a couple $1,000s. He asked me, well, what should I do? And everyone looked at me wondering what my answer was going to be, and I kind of thought it was a trick question because I thought that we paid to fix things. That's what we as the board did. So why was he asking me? Was there a trick there? And I didn't know what to do, and that bothered me. I like knowing the answer. I like being the person that knows what solid ground is. And that's why we're presenting this webinar today, to give you the training you need to minimize or eliminate situations where you don't know what to do or don't know the answer. And that's, of course, especially important here in 2020 when so much of what we've come to expect or know as normal no longer exists. So let's get going on the webinar. As Paige said, everyone's muted to keep background noise to a minimum, but if at any time DJ or I need your feedback, we'll ask you to raise your hands. Not being in the room with us, the way you do that is by finding the hands raised button in your control panel. It will look a lot like what you see in the middle of your screen. So grab your mouse and get over to your hands raised button, and let's test that right here. Give me a hands raised if you're ready to get started on the presentation. Oh, very good. I see hands going up all up and down my list of attendees. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to put hands down. And here we go. I'm going to lay a little more foundation before handing off to DJ, and it all starts with knowing that the major expenses related to age and deterioration are big, they're inevitable, and association finances in nonprofits are always going to be tight. So you're always going to be in a pressure situation or a scarcity situation. DJ is going to cover the more advanced material today, but if you ever feel like we've skipped over some basics, you can catch up with some of our recorded webinars, which you'll find on our website. So go to reservestudy.com, and on our resources tab, click on webinars. I recommend Reserve Study Basics, which you see highlighted there, and another webinar we call Roadmap for Success. And those webinars address things like phased projects, insurance deductibles, reserves versus capital improvements, things like that. Basically the decisions that you often face throughout the year. Those foundational principles plus today's material are all designed to help you avoid that awful feeling of not knowing what to do. We want to set you up for success. And that's because managing or leading an association is complicated. There's many decisions you're going to face throughout the year, and many ways you can get it, unfortunately, wrong. So let me hand off to DJ now, who will share some truths, some insights from his experience, and some answers to help you avoid problems. DJ.
Hey, thanks a lot, Robert. It's great to be here with you and all our guests today. You know, sometimes reserve studies are challenges right from the start. We hear objections like the ones you see on screen all the time. What's it good for? It's really just a bunch of guesses. Why pay for something we'll just ignore? Gotta love that one.
I like that too.
Yeah. And how can reserve studies sometimes be so different from year to year or even between different provider companies? So let me dive right in. A reserve study is based on predictions about future events over which we have no control. It's kind of weird to work in a field where I know with 100% certainty that our reserve study projections will not all come true. But think of it like a roadmap or getting directions on your phone. While it may not be perfect, it's still a pretty effective tool to put you in the direction you need to go. A reserve study also shows what you need to do to get successfully to the future. It helps you see the twists and turns along the way, and if it's going to be an easy trip or a bumpy ride. So, you need to get that guide to help you with your decision points. We base our reserve studies on industry standards, plus actual project history at your association and neighboring properties. We've assembled the best information available to help you see, and anticipate the future before it happens. Like that navigation app on your phone, there's no one saying you have to follow your reserve study, but it's a great guide that lays out your major upcoming expenses, giving you a window to what your association needs to prepare for financially. With a reserve study, you're less likely to be surprised by a big expense like Robert talked about earlier. We like our clients being prepared. Now, a couple slides back, I mentioned industry standards, and that was a reference to National Reserve Study standards. These standards guide our entire industry, helping us use consistent terminology, calculations that give you standard disclosures, even guiding us with regard to which component should appear in your reserve study. The more your reserve study provider follows national standards, the more accurate and useful your reserve study will be. So let's talk about some specifics. Some of the problems I hear clients getting into are avoidable. They make me think of minefields. So let me help you learn how to avoid some common problems. First, don't make statements you can't support. When it comes to the reserve study, it's much better to say, well, let's look at the reserve study and see what it says, rather than say, oh, the reserves are great. People can and will misinterpret your well-intended comments. Always go to the source, the reserve study itself. Second, you create your own problems when you're working with old information. It's like trying to make wise financial decisions in October by looking at a February financial report. It's important to update your reserve study and work with current information. Another avoidable problem is delaying projects. While it often sounds like a good idea, thinking if you don't spend the money, it's money saved, right? In most cases, doing the project on time is a good idea. Except for a few cases where the project is insignificant, reserve projects should generally be done on time because they keep the property well maintained, which avoids expensive deferred maintenance. Plus, it maintains good function and curb appeal, which is important in supporting strong property values. But be careful. Don't carelessly spend reserve funds on non-reserve projects. Make sure anything you spend reserves on is either listed as a reserve component or passes National Reserve Study Standards 4-part test. It may seem like no big deal, but a few $100 or $1,000 here or there really adds up over a year and prevents you from having as much in reserves as you were planning.
Hey DJ, I got to stop you there. I got a few of my clients doing exactly that. They seem like, thinking that it doesn't matter, overspending or spending on some extra things. Boy, over the end of a year, it's $10,000 or $20,000, and it really makes a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, when your reserve balance is much lower than expected, we have to change our funding plan to make up for that difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so the same is true on the income side. Make sure you're making all your scheduled reserve contributions. You can't spend it on reserve projects if you never put it in, and your reserve plan is based on the association making its scheduled contributions. Finally, we call this the wishful thinking problem. There are too many of my clients thinking there's a magic genie out there capable of granting good fortune on their association. It just doesn't happen. If you're being too optimistic, you don't have a realistic plan and you won't be prepared for your own reality. The only reserve contributions are the ones you actually make. Too many boards budget optimistically and end up behind. Well, let's keep an eye on the big picture. What are we trying to accomplish with reserves? Well, we want to have enough funds on hand to do your scheduled projects in a timely manner when they need to be done. I grew up as an athlete, and all three of my kids have competed in sports. I like to win. In the sports you play, you need to know the rules and the score. So how do you win at reserves? Just like with most games, the score is based on numbers. You have a plan that's based on income and expenses. You need to keep the income coming in and keep your expenses from getting out of hand. And there are actually two sets of rules that affect reserve studies and reserve fund management. The first set of rules is pretty straightforward. It's what we call the 4 reserve rules.
We got to think of a better name than that.
Yeah. It's really just a statement of the facts that expenses, as you likely know, will always happen. There's no dodging them. The board is responsible to manage association assets. Like I mentioned a moment ago, delays often get expensive. So it's good to do your reserve projects on time and not let them get out of hand. And then the owners always get stuck paying the bills. Again, there's no magic genie to bail you out. Whether the board saves money or makes things more expensive, owners always get stuck paying the bills. The other set of rules is called the business judgment rule. When a board's decisions are challenged, whatever they've done is checked against the three-part business judgment rule. When the board is collecting all those reserve contributions and then paying those large reserve expenses, you want to make sure you're operating in line with the rules. What's interesting is that in hindsight, your decisions can be flat out wrong, but if you can show that you followed the process and had a reasonable basis for the actions taken, you'll have a strong defense. So, make sure everything you do can be described as being in good faith, meaning you were loyal and responsive to the needs of the association, and that you operated in the best interest of the association. That means your decisions weren't self-serving or wasteful, and you were careful and responsible with association money. That you also acted prudently or responsibly, meaning when you simply didn't know what to do, you didn't just guess. You reached out to a subject matter expert for assistance. That could be your accountant, attorney, manager, insurance agent, reserve study provider, or even the owner of your landscape company. In other words, no guessing. Also, there's something new you should know about because more and more people will be asking if the association has adequate reserves. You need to be careful because now that is a defined industry term. You can see more on our website, but pretty simply, having adequate reserves means your reserve plan shows that you'll have enough cash to do all your reserve projects now and for the next 20 years without reliance on future loans or special assessments. So think sustainability. Again, no wishful thinking or relying on a magic genie, but having a successful plan for the future. Now you may often think or be asked, how to responsibly lower your reserve contributions? Because that's what every board member wants to do, right?
Keep them low. Yeah.
Yeah,
Careful
right.
of those assessments.
Stay popular and hold on to that board member seat.
Oh, it's so fun to have.
Yeah. Knowing you can't change your expenses. I mean, the roof is going to fail no matter how hard you wish it will last longer. You're forced to figure out something else. The first step is to maximize reserve income, which means maximizing your interest earnings. Some of our clients do that by shopping around to different banks. Some of our clients do that by laddering their investments so they can sock away money, the money they don't need for a longer period of time, and earn higher interest rates. Another idea is to do your projects on time. I can't tell you how many times a client has delayed a painting, asphalt, roofing, or deck project thinking they were saving money, only to end up spending way more money. And I'm talking 20 to 40% more just a year or two later due to fixing deferred maintenance. Make your reserve contributions and keep your reserve expenses in check. Associations with a strong reserve fund are just keeping their reserve fund stable. They aren't playing catch up. It's like driving on the freeway. You're already up to speed. You're not having to periodically step hard on the accelerator to speed up. Generally, associations with a strong reserve fund have lower contributions than those struggling to get over the hurdles that come from a marginal reserve fund. The consequences of underfunding are real. When your reserves are weak, you need to step on the gas and play catch up to make up for all those years of underfunding. And then there are ways to save money on your reserve study expenses. The first is to hire us for the right level of service. If you've had a reserve study prepared responsibly according to National Reserve Study standards, you don't need another full reserve study. It's time for you to select between the less expensive with site visit or no site visit updates. You can improve the quality of your reserve study by asking questions and making sure the reserve study is custom tuned to your association. And finally, be involved in the process. When we find a helpful client that answers our questions about what was done and when and why and by whom, it reduces the amount of time we spend, and we'll be able to charge less for your reserve study updates. Now, you signed up for advanced concepts, so let's cover a few more. So first, interest and inflation are both real and important. They don't cancel each other out. And that's because interest is earned only on the reserve funds you have on deposit, but inflation causes the entire value of your components to grow. For example, you might have $80,000 in your reserve fund earning a very minimal amount of interest at this point.
Yep.
But your reserve components might be valued at around $800,000, and that's increasing each year due to inflation. That's why inflation has a much greater influence on the funding analysis than interest earnings.
Hey, DJ, Paige did that poll at the beginning, and my recollection is that most people had that right, but for everyone else, I thought you gave a great explanation.
I think it was like 54% had that right. And, the inflation is definitely a bigger factor.
Yep.
Now, I've also talked about the danger of delaying a project, and let me emphasize it again here. There really is very little value to delaying a project. The expense is still there. Unless you can totally eliminate the expense, which pretty much never happens, delaying a project doesn't have a measurable effect on reducing your reserve contributions. Trust me on this. It's just not worth it. Also, getting worked up or frustrated about the question of paying an expense through operating your reserves is not a big deal. A $5,000 pool heater is just as expensive to the owners, regardless of which account it's paid from. We cover that issue in other webinars, but the bottom line is that there is no effect on homeowners whether it is paid from their right pocket or their left pocket, operating or reserves. And by all means, think ahead and take advantage of ways to save money by doing projects together. If you need to paint your building trim, paint your ironwork at the same time. If you need to seal your asphalt, perhaps paint your red curbs at the same time. And if you're replacing furniture in the clubhouse, consider replacing the carpet and repainting at the same time. If you can combine projects and save the contractor time, they can likely save the association some money.
Yeah, DJ, we call that mobilization. So if you can minimize the mobilizations, is that what you mean by saving the time on the contractor's end?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you look through some of the contracts, mobilization is a big expense depending on the type of project you're looking at. But mobilization is big, but the contractor's already on site. He's already got people on site, and they're going to charge less money because they're not going back and forth.
Yeah, might as well get a bunch of things done.
And it looks better too. If you do a bunch of stuff together, it has a bigger impact than one thing.
Yep, good.
Now, a few clients have voiced concerns that they don't want to inappropriately influence the process. They want a good reserve study and don't want to impact the outcome. But hey, no worries on that. I've done thousands of these. I know National Reserve Study standards, and it's our company logo that goes on the cover. So we welcome your suggestions and insights into what happened and when and why. After all, more information will improve the accuracy of the report. But we also know when to put our filters on and keep our independence. Nobody twists our arms, and we know when to dig in our heels. Now, let me take a moment to go over best practices with respect to your reserve funding plan. First, it's in your best interest, and you'll have the most success if you characterize reserve contributions as offsetting deterioration. That makes reserve contributions sound like paying an ongoing bill, which in truth, that's what it is. Just because the roof doesn't send a bill for its deterioration every month doesn't mean it didn't deteriorate. Pay that deterioration bill. Don't say reserve contributions are for the future or for a rainy day. Not only is that inaccurate, it just makes contributions sound optional or someone else's problem. Now, we're going to design a funding plan that is steady and smooth, which is recommended in National Reserve Study standards. As much as possible, we don't want to unsettle your owners with big increases. So we're going to design a smooth funding plan, and it's up to you to get your reserve study updated regularly so any plan adjustments are small. Finally, if a big change is necessary, we'll likely create a multi-year plan, something we call the exercise plan. Just like most of us can't go out and run a marathon next week, I know I can't.
Not me either.
It takes some time to prepare. An exercise funding plan is a series of increases for 2 to 5 years to gradually get your reserve contributions up to where they need to be. The last topic I'll cover before Robert begins to wrap things up is helping you understand some of the nuances of what you're getting in the reserve study. So first, how far ahead do we look in estimating component expenses? The answer is at least 20 years of projected income and expenses, which is required by National Reserve Study standards. Projects within the next 30 years are required by state law over in California and other states. But the real answer is that we want to capture all the significant, reasonably predictable projects that are in your future. We don't want you to be surprised. So if you just put on a new roof that has a 40-year design life, we're still going to include it in your reserve study, even though it's beyond the 30-year time frame illustrated in our report. And I mentioned a few times the importance of updating your reserve study. So what can I tell you to help you make a wise decision about how often to update your reserve study? First, in preparing over 55,000 reserve studies, we've learned that when we only touch a client's reserve study every 5 years, it's pretty much a rescue mission. So much has changed about the components, life and cost, and even the reserve balance, that sometimes it's almost like a new reserve study. The association has seriously gotten off track. For those that hire us every 3 years, that's pretty reasonable, but we still usually need to make some big changes. Finally, another category are those clients that hire us every year. In almost all cases, the reserve studies we update annually are just minor tweaks. Just what the board needs, very easy on the owners. The reserve plan just never gets off track. So in addition to my impressions, let me give you some numbers. Associations that hire us every 3 years instead of every 5 years have 8.3% fewer special assessments than the 5-year group. And that's simply because they've limited their drifting away from the original plan to just 3 years instead of getting 5 years off the original plan. And let me wrap up my portion of the presentation with this one. Here's a huge benefit that will help you decide how often to update your reserve study. Associations that update their reserve study annually have just over 35% fewer special assessments than the 5-year group. And again, that's just because they're staying on top of their plan, never letting it drift away.
Hey DJ, as you were telling those numbers, it made me think that there's so many boards who are updating their reserve study based on what the law says. And what you're showing here is that there's some real benefits to choosing your update frequency. Is that right?
Absolutely, sure.
Okay. All right. Well, DJ, again, thanks for putting that information together and sharing those insights, your feelings, and the actual numbers behind them. Well, those of you who've enjoyed our webinars previously have seen these basic things, and some of the basic things we help show you how updating annually is a great idea, and that was just some good solid information there. Now, as we talk about advanced concepts today, I want to tell you about a new tool that we've created to help you with your budgeting beginning this year. Now, as you're working with your budget and your reserve study, we often hear that you want to know what happens if you try something different, or what happens when that happens. And of course, it's your association. It might be some changes to your component list, maybe delaying a project, testing to see if that makes a difference. And as DJ said, it usually doesn't make much of a difference in the plan at least, or testing what happens if you're able to get a little more interest, or maybe your starting balance starting to look like that was projected a little optimistically. Well, we've solved that. Getting the reserve study is no longer the end of what we do for you. We've got a great new tool we think you'll like very much, and we call it UPlanet. It's an online tool, and you'll find it right next to where you find your completed reserve study from Association Reserves, and it allows you to interact with your numbers. You can test your ideas, allowing you to see for yourself what happens when you change a number here or there, and it allows you to print out different charts or tables that you can use in the budgeting process, so you can say that, well, the reserve study says this, but when I change these, look what it changes, what it does, and you can find out if it makes a lot of difference or a little difference. UPlanet doesn't affect the reserve study. It's just a powerful online calculator that allows you to see for yourself what happens when you don't do exactly what is laid out in the reserve study plan. So let me show you real quickly what it is and what it does. And I'm going to pull that over. and show you when you log in to our client center, when you get notified that we finish a reserve study. For a portfolio manager, they're presented with a screen that looks like this, showing their list of properties. And classically, you'd click on one of the properties and look at your reserve study and see what we have to say, the disclosures, the recommendations. But now we've got uPlanet. You can see uPlanet here has a page for components, your control panel. It has your starting balance, interest and inflation, recommendations where you can see what's going on, and some customization if you want to do that, and then tables and charts. So let me show you what it does. For your budget season for this reserve study at this time for this year, you can go in and start to make some changes. Let's say that you are going to be able to push the asphalt seal out a year, changing it from 1 year or 0 years remaining to 1 year remaining. And let's do something else, or 2 or 3. You see they just painted a bunch of projects, and let's say that it's time to do the pool furniture. Let's just get that done this year. It's looking pretty lousy. And 4,000, let's say you can get it all done for 3,500. Okay, so you made some changes to your components, and interest and inflation looks good, but due to COVID-19, you've had to shave some of your reserve contributions. So instead of starting January 1, 2021 with 176,000, let's say that you're going to be at about $150,000, and see what that does. Looks like it doesn't make too much of a change. Our recommendation was 5210. We can do a full funding plan, and based on those changes, we're going to recommend 5270, so not a big difference. If you want to see what your range of possibilities are, if you want to stay just cash positive, you can click the baseline solver and find out that just to stay cash positive above 0, you need to be making contributions of at least 4630. And this is important because when clients come with their recommendation and they see us saying that you need to set aside, in this case, 5270, and some treasurer or committee member says, nah, we don't want to do that. Let's just do 4,000. That's close enough. You can recalculate and find out that, nah, that's not going to work. You crash and burn in just over 10 years. And this is what we mean by allowing you to see what fits, what doesn't fit, and understanding, like DJ said, that there's a deterioration bill. And the roof is going to fail. Whether you wish it to last longer or not, whether you wish it to be cheaper or not. And this just helps, this tool now helps you to see what all these numbers are doing and meaning. And of course, lots of different tables and charts that you can view and print out for budgeting process. And let me get back to our presentation here. How's that? Okay, back to the presentation. And the great news is that access to uPlanet is free throughout your budget season with every completed association reserves, full with site visit and no site visit reserve study. So when we deliver your completed reserve study for that engagement for that season, that's when you have access to uPlanet. It's a great tool. If you're not a current client or if you're not a client at all, we make a subscription available for $149 a year. Well, we want you making informed decisions. So we created that tool to help give you an edge in the budget process. And that's, of course, especially important here in 2020 when everything seems to be in a regular state of change. We want to help you see what happens when you tweak some of your numbers and that's exactly what UPlanet can do for you. Well, if you're still eager for more information, a great source is our resource of recorded webinars on our website, like I mentioned earlier in the program. An advanced tip, of course, for everyone today in our advanced reserves program is that the outline for each webinar, in addition to the recording, is there, and that contains a pretty nice resource of all the Q&A from our audience. Lots of great questions. And as a reminder, those of you who fill out the short survey at the end of this program will be emailed the outline for today's program, which will include all the Q&A, including the one from the other session we performed and the ones we weren't able to get to in the limited time that we have. And of course, there's other trade organizations with luncheon programs. They're virtual this year, where you can learn from other speakers and others in the audience. And finally, if you like this program and would like us to do some in-house training for your multi-site management company, shoot us an email. We'd be glad to provide the training you need for your staff so you can be sharp and confident when presenting reserve study information to your client associations. Now, we're aware that the decisions you make, the choices you make, create your future. We don't want you to struggle like this Aspen Creek condominiums, making sloppy decisions and poor decisions. We'd like to come alongside and help and guide you with reserve studies that, when matched with your good, courageous choices, are going to create a great future for your association or the ones that you manage. But before we close, let me leave you with one more advanced tip, and that's a strong reserve fund is a smart financial move. We did a study back in 2016 that found, to no surprise, that homes in associations with a strong reserve fund, over 70% funded, the ones on the right there, sold for about 12% more on average than comparable condos in associations with a weak reserve fund in the 0 to 30% funded range. And that's because curb appeal and timely maintenance has a very real effect on home values. Associations that have the money to do their reserve projects on time enjoy higher property values. And I'll include a link to that report in our webinar outline. And for those for those resources we've mentioned on reserve studies, or for a way to request a proposal for reserve study update, you can go to our website, or you can go to our website and scroll to the bottom and sign up for our email list to make sure you're notified for future webinars like this one. And that brings our program to a close, and it's time to turn the microphone over to Paige, who will handle our Q&A time together. Paige, the microphone is all yours.